Phil Campbell wasn't born to be famous. He was born to survive. For more than 3 decades, he stood as the silent pillar of Motörhead, the band notorious for booze, speed, and tours that felt like war zones. While others fell to the chaos of the very music they created, Campbell remained standing. No scandals, no collapse. Just a Les Paul in his hands and the iron will of a man who knew exactly where he belonged. But behind that calm exterior was a brutal journey. From a working-class boy in Wales, teaching himself guitar until his fingers bled, to the moment he risked everything to step into Motörhead. He isn't remembered as a star, but as the last survivor. The man who kept the soul of heavy metal beating even as the world around him fell apart. Phil Campbell's story isn't about fame. It's about how one man walked through the hell of rock and roll and somehow came out with his heart still intact. And to understand how he could walk through that hell without losing himself, we have to return to where it all began. A small town in Wales, where rain and coal smoke covered the sky, and where the dream of music was once considered foolish. Phil Campbell was born in 1961 in Pontypridd, into a humble working-class family. No one in the household played music. No one had ever stepped on a stage. His parents only hoped their son would one day have a steady job and a quiet home. But in that cramped room, where rock records first reached his ears, the boy felt something beyond the world he knew. A sound that made his heart race, a call he couldn't ignore. Phil's first guitar wasn't a luxury gift, but a second-hand instrument his parents bought with their meager savings. He had no teacher, no formal training, only an old record player, a few albums by Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, and Black Sabbath, and the patience of someone willing to spend hours replaying a single riff until his fingers bled. In that town, where music was treated as a pastime, Phil saw it as the only way to survive. His childhood had no grand journeys, no mentors, only a stubborn passion and countless nights spent alone, letting the guitar speak for him. His parents didn't stop him, but they didn't believe that anything could come from that noise either. Yet their silence became his motivation. Phil understood that if he wanted to prove music could be a way out, he would have to step out of those old streets himself. While his peers dreamed of steady factory jobs, Phil began playing in small pubs. They were noisy nights. Audiences drank more than they listened. But he played as if he were on the biggest stage in the world. No money, no fame, no one knew his name. But every note mattered, because it was the only proof that his dream was still alive. It was in those quiet, unseen years that Phil learned the most important lesson of all. Music doesn't need recognition. It needs absolute faith. And that faith would guide the boy from a misty Welsh town toward the bright lights of the stage, where destiny, called Motörhead, was waiting for him. From those nights playing in countryside pubs, Phil knew he had to step out of the quiet shadow of Wales if he ever wanted to be heard. By the late 1970s, he moved to Cardiff, where the new wave of British heavy metal was exploding. There, young men with long hair, leather jackets, and steel-like dreams were redefining what British rock could be. Phil quickly found his place in that wave. In 1979, he founded Persian Risk, serving as both its creator and lead guitarist, the sonic heart of the band. Persian Risk embodied a blend of classic hard rock and the rising metallic edge. Powerful melodies, thick riffs, pounding drums, and solos filled with tension. Phil didn't just play guitar. He built structures, wrote songs, and poured every ounce of his youth into each riff. Those were years lived at the speed of fire, when every night on stage felt like gambling his life on a dream. In 1981, the single "Calling for You" was released. a song that captured the raw NWOBHM spirit, opening with a cold, decisive guitar line that burst into a chorus like a cry for freedom. It didn't make the major charts, but spread quickly through the underground scene, gaining airplay on independent radio stations across the UK and turning Persian Risk into a promising new name. 2 years later, between 1982 and 1983, the band appeared on several metal compilations and released Ridin' High, a harder, more technical song that still retained its rough edge. They began to perform on small stages, even appearing on regional television. A dream come true for any young band. But for Persian Risk, that light faded as quickly as it appeared. Without a major label or marketing machine, everything became a fight between passion and survival. Tensions grew between ambition and the cold reality of having no money to go on. Phil, though the founder, had to watch as bandmates drifted away one by one, leaving behind a mixture of sorrow and resolve. The final years of Persian Risk brought no scandals, only exhaustion. They had the music, the fire, but not the luck. Phil understood that sometimes talent and passion weren't enough to open the gates of the world. When Ridin' High failed to break through commercially, he faced the heartbreak of watching his creation fade away. But that failure became his stepping stone, teaching him endurance and how to rise again when everything collapses. And then, as if fate had been waiting, an opportunity arrived. Fiercer and more brutal than anything before. An audition for Motörhead, the band infamous for chaos, speed, and madness. Phil had no idea that the moment he walked into that audition with his Les Paul would change his life forever and begin the next chapter of a survivor's legend. When Persian Risk disbanded, Phil Campbell stood at a crossroads, return to an ordinary life or keep chasing the sound that had haunted him since childhood. He chose the latter, fully aware it was a path few survived. Then in 1984, destiny knocked. Motörhead, the most notorious band in the rock world, was in crisis. Guitarist Brian Robertson of Thin Lizzy had just quit, and Lemmy Kilmister needed someone new. Not a star, but a fighter. Campbell, then just an unknown guitarist from Wales, decided to risk everything. In 3 short days, he learned nearly 20 Motörhead songs and brought his old Gibson Les Paul, the only thing he owned, to the audition in London. The room was thick with smoke, amplifiers screeching, nobody saying much. Lemmy stood there, watched him play, and gave a small nod. No fancy contract, no promises, just that nod. But it opened a 31-year journey of relentless endurance. Phil was chosen alongside Michael Wurzelburston, marking the first time Motörhead had 2 guitarists. That lineup quickly became a new metal war machine, heavier, tighter, but also more chaotic. Phil entered a world where every night was a battle. Endless tours, buses reeking of beer and smoke, shabby hotels, and never-ending hangovers. In that world, one moment of weakness could crush you. The 1986 album Orgasmatron marked his first milestone with Motörhead, a wall of sound, raw and molten. Under Campbell's hands, the band's guitar tone became sharper, thicker, and more focused, less chaotic, but still ferocious. Songs like Deaf Forever and Claw were no longer just screams of rebellion, they were anthems of survival. Though not a commercial smash, the album pulled Motörhead back from the brink, and Lemmy knew he had found his true ally. But life in Motörhead was never easy. Every tour was a war between passion and exhaustion. They played more than 200 nights a year, sometimes so continuously that time zones blurred. Lemmy drowned in alcohol, crew members came and went, and Campbell, the only one who kept his balance, had to hold the band together. He didn't fight for the spotlight or for thanks. When the sound went off beat, he fixed it. When Lemmy collapsed backstage, he waited in silence. It wasn't just a job anymore, it was survival. From an unknown player, Phil Campbell became the backbone of Motörhead, the man who never stood out, yet without whom the whole machine would fall apart. And from here, the most brutal decades of heavy metal began, with Campbell standing where he always belonged, right in the eye of the storm, but never letting it swallow him. Phil Campbell's arrival didn't just save Motörhead from collapsing, it opened a new musical chapter, fiercer, tighter, and more technically sophisticated than ever before. In 1986, the album Orgasmatron was released, marking his first major milestone with the band. From the opening riffs, listeners could sense a different Motörhead, no longer just a raw punk metal storm, but a sound forged through discipline and emotion. Phil brought a guitar tone sharp as a blade and hard as steel, tempered in fire and smoke, forming the backbone for Lemmy's thunderous, prophetic roar. Deaf Forever, Claw, Dr. Rock. Each track was a fragment of the band's evolution, wild but ordered, furious yet structured. Critics and fans alike called it the Campbell era, when Motörhead's sound became unified, distinct, and mature. A year later, Rock and Roll 1987 continued that flow. It wasn't revolutionary, but it proved that the new lineup, Lemmy, Phil, Wurzel, and Pete Gill, had found their shared rhythm. The compositions were tighter, with Campbell's riffs taking center stage on songs like Stone Deaf in the USA and Eat the Rich. Though critics dismissed it as unoriginal, audiences embraced it, bringing Motörhead back to the charts and proving they still had fire amid the rise of Metallica, Slayer, and Megadeth. But behind that success lay chaos only insiders could truly grasp. By the late 1980s, Motörhead entered one of the most turbulent periods in their history. Conflicts with record labels, first Bronze Records, then GWR, nearly froze the band's progress. Projects stalled, tours were cut short, money ran dry, and internal tensions mounted. Wurzel wanted change, Lemmy resisted, and Campbell, the quiet one, became the anchor holding everything together. Amid financial strain and personnel turmoil, he remained rooted on stage, gripping his guitar as if that alone could keep Motörhead alive. When the band lost management, he handled the logistics himself. When tempers flared, he chose silence and played, because only the music was strong enough to drown out the fighting. For Campbell, loyalty wasn't a slogan, it was survival. By the late 80s, when many believed Motörhead was just a relic of the past, he kept the flame alive. Through the smoke, the broken contracts, and the sleepless nights on tour, Phil Campbell was still there, not needing to be seen, only to be heard. And from that chaos, Motörhead would rise again, stepping into the 1990s with music more seasoned and ferocious than ever before. As the new decade began, while many heavy metal bands of the 70s and 80s were fading, Motörhead was reborn. The transformation didn't come from reinvention, but from the quiet maturity of three men who had weathered every storm: Lemmy Kilmister, Phil Campbell, and Mickey D. The trio that would define the next 2 decades. It was during this era that Phil ceased to be merely Lemmy's guitarist and became a co-architect of the sound that carried Motörhead into a new age. In 1990, they released 1916, one of the most pivotal albums of their career. It was the first in years made with full creative freedom after escaping restrictive contracts. 1916 retained Motörhead's trademark speed and aggression, but added more depth, clarity, and emotional weight. Campbell delivered tight, layered riffs and thick but refined chord structures that powered tracks like The One to Sing the Blues and Going to Brazil. The album brought Motörhead back to the Billboard charts and even earned them a Grammy nomination for Best Metal Performance, a rare honor for a band long considered too raw for mainstream recognition. That success paved the way for March or Die, 1992, an album of contradictions. While Lemmy sought to experiment with modern production and high-profile collaborations with Ozzy Osbourne and Slash, Campbell remained loyal to the band's core. The music had to be raw, alive, and metallic. The creative tension made the record inconsistent, yet it also revealed Campbell's growing independence. He was no longer just following orders, but defending Motörhead's identity in an increasingly polished metal scene. When Bastards, 1993, arrived, the band was fully back to form, uncompromising and unapologetic. It was a raw, powerful record capturing Motörhead in their purest state, feral, urgent, and honest. Campbell unleashed riffs that sliced through the air in Burner and Born to Raise Hell, crafting a sound that was both classic and new. Though it lacked major promotion, Bastards became a fan favorite, a hidden gem proving Motörhead didn't need to change to survive. They only needed to be themselves. By 1995, with Sacrifice, Campbell and Mikkey Dee had fused into one seamless engine. The album was a declaration of 90s metal, fast, heavy, and brutal. Amid internal crises, Wurzel's departure and Lemmy's declining health, Campbell maintained the pulse, the only steady bridge between the band's past and present. He wasn't just playing, he was keeping Motörhead's heart beating. Just a year later, Overnight Sensation, 1996, reaffirmed the band's creative vitality. With only 3 members, they somehow produced a sound bigger than ever. The melodies were sharper, and Campbell's solos carried emotional weight, shaped by nearly 2 decades of mastery. His tone balanced cold precision with a surprising warmth, a rare equilibrium between instinct and wisdom. By 1998, Snakebite Love capped off a remarkable string of 90s albums, a testament to their endurance. Not every record was a commercial hit, but each proved that Motörhead was still evolving. Between Lemmy and Mikkey Dee, Phil Campbell continued to do what he did best, keeping everything from falling apart. When asked how Motörhead managed to survive for so long, the answer wasn't just Lemmy's legend, it was the man standing beside him, the one who always played in time, even when the world was coming undone. After the turbulent 1990s, Motörhead entered the new millennium with an unfamiliar mindset, no longer chasing trends, but staying fiercely loyal to themselves. In 2000, they released We Are Motörhead, a true declaration, not just an album, but a manifesto from men who had weathered half a lifetime of storms. By then, Phil Campbell was no longer the new guy. He had become the band's backbone, the one who sustained the heartbeat that made Motörhead unlike anyone else. On this record, he delivered riffs that were both simple and razor-sharp, keeping their sound raw and uncompromising in an era drowning in alternative and new metal. 2 years later came Hammered, 2002, darker, heavier, and more industrial, reflecting the band's aging bodies and unyielding spirit. Phil's playing was steadier, slower, but every note fell like a block of steel. It was also the period when Lemmy began struggling with health issues, forcing Campbell to become not just a bandmate, but the glue, musically and emotionally, that held everything together. On endless tours, he was always the last to leave the stage, making sure everything ran smoothly behind the ever-present chaos. The peak of this era came with Inferno, 2004, an explosive record that stunned both fans and critics. It was hailed as Motörhead's rebirth in the 21st century. Faster, heavier, and sharper, to the point of brutality. Campbell unleashed his full technical range on tracks like Terminal Show and In the Name of Tragedy. where his guitar became both the fire that burned and the chain that kept the sound from detonating entirely. Kerrang! Gave it a rare 5.5 rating, calling it an album of resurrection. Around that time, the band celebrated its 30th anniversary, 2004-2005. They toured across Europe, released commemorative live albums, and, most importantly, were finally recognized worldwide. When Motorhead covered Metallica's Whiplash for a tribute album, no one expected it to win the Grammy for Best Metal Performance, 2005. For the first time in his career, Phil Campbell, who never cared about awards, became a co-recipient of a Grammy, a golden statue symbolizing endurance finally honored by an industry that had long ignored them. Back home, pride came in a quieter but equally meaningful form. Between 2003 and 2004, Campbell was voted among the 100 Welsh heroes, alongside some of Wales's greatest cultural figures. Thousands of fans cast their votes, not because he was a famous musician, but because he embodied the belief that a working-class boy from a small industrial town could step onto the world stage without ever losing his roots. Amid the guitars, accolades, and roaring crowds, what Phil Campbell truly held on to wasn't fame. It was respect, from his bandmates, his audience, and his homeland. And when the Grammy lights faded, he returned to the only things that ever kept him alive: the guitar, the stage, and the metallic heartbeat that never stopped. After all those years spent among the roar of amplifiers and the haze of whiskey-filled air, Phil Campbell managed to keep what many rockers only dream of: a stable home. In contrast to the hedonistic, chaotic image that surrounds the metal world, he lived with near monastic discipline. When not on tour, he rose early, ate on schedule, exercised daily, and devoted time to his family. That calm demeanor, amid the madness of rock and roll, made him a living paradox, the guitarist of Motörhead who lived like a humble craftsman from the countryside. He met his wife back when he was still an unknown musician playing in Welsh pubs. There was no fame, no glamour, just a young man consumed by music and a woman who believed his passion was worth trusting. They married early, when Campbell was still struggling with Persian Risk, and that love carried them through every storm, from endless tours to the weary years when Lemmy was ill and the band was stretched to its limits. While many rock marriages crumbled under distance and chaos, she always waited, quietly, without complaint. Just as he stood silently on stage, letting the music speak for him. When tours ended and others dove into parties or slept off the exhaustion, Phil returned home to Wales. His house wasn't luxurious, just a modest place with a garage filled with guitars, cables, and the laughter of his 3 sons, Todd, Tyler, and Dane, all of whom naturally followed in their father's footsteps. There was no pressure, no expectations, only music flowing in their veins. Phil never taught them how to play. He simply sat beside them, listened, and smiled when they found their own sound. On winter nights, the family gathered around the amplifiers, guitars blending with the wind outside, a quiet happiness that no amount of fame could buy. Outside of music, Campbell's 2 lifelong passions were guitars and motorcycles. He collected more than 100 Gibson Les Pauls, each one carefully maintained and fine-tuned as if it had its own soul. In his garage, he was both musician and craftsman, spending hours polishing vintage motorbikes, changing oil, adjusting engines, finding peace in the sound of machines instead of the roar of crowds. His life wasn't perfect, but it was solid. His wife once stayed angry for 3 days when he named his new band Phil Campbell and the Bastard Sons, a title that sounded irreverent but perfectly captured the raw, familial spirit of rock, rebellious yet loyal to its roots. Eventually, she laughed, and those bastard sons stood beside their father on stage, proof that some legacies aren't born of tragedy, but of endurance. In a world where so many artists lose themselves to the spotlight, Phil Campbell remains a rare exception. He survived, not just on stage, but in life itself. A man who managed to keep the two things rock and roll always demanded as sacrifices: his music and his family. In the early 2010s, while many bands of their era had stopped or fallen into repetition, Motörhead kept rolling on. In his 50s, Phil Campbell still stood on stage with the same ferocity he had in his youth. In 2013, they released Aftershock, the 21st album of their career. Yet it carried the vitality of a band at its peak. The sound on Aftershock was thicker, tighter, and more determined. Tracks like Heartbreaker and End of Time revealed Campbell's guitar work at its most refined. No longer showy, but a force of precision, sharp and cold as steel. Critics called it a resurrection without a miracle, because it proved that Motörhead still carried an indomitable spirit after 4 decades of existence. 2 years later came Bad Magic, 2015, the final studio album in the band's history. From its opening track, Victory or Die, listeners could sense an urgency, as if the record itself were a musical farewell. Phil played harder than ever, his riffs heavy and blade-like, but beneath the aggression lay a quiet fatigue that lingered through every song. The tour for Bad Magic reflected that duality. Some nights the audience burned with them. Others had to be canceled suddenly, due to Lemmy's health and sometimes Phil's. Both men were worn down after decades of relentless motion. In November 2015, during the European leg of the tour, Phil Campbell was unexpectedly hospitalized. No details were made public, but the canceled shows in Germany and Denmark served as a stark reminder of the physical limits he had always tried to ignore. And then, just weeks later, the unthinkable happened. On December 28, 2015, Lemmy Kilmister, Motörhead's leader and soul, passed away. No press conference, no farewell, just a brief announcement. Motörhead was over. For Phil Campbell, that moment wasn't just losing a friend. It was the collapse of the world he belonged to. For over 30 years, he and Lemmy had stood side by side on thousands of stages, but in the end, neither he nor Mickey D got to say goodbye. Lemmy's sudden death left an irreplaceable void, a wound that nearly broke Campbell completely. He later admitted that he fell into emotional paralysis for months, on the brink of retirement. There were no more tours, no more band, no more brother to share the noise with. To the world, Lemmy was a legend, but to Phil Campbell, he was family. After the funeral, Campbell quietly left, giving no speech, no interviews. For him, Motörhead didn't die because Lemmy was gone. It died because for the first time, no one was left strong enough to keep the rhythm. And in that silence, the essence of Phil Campbell became clear. A guitarist who had lived his whole life for music and lost a part of himself when the music stopped. After Lemmy's death, Phil's world felt stripped bare. He walked away from the stage, packed away his guitars, and for months couldn't bring himself to listen to a single Motörhead song. But music for him was never something you could put away forever. It was like breathing. Stop, and you die. Then, in 2016, in a small room in Wales, he plugged in his guitar, looked at his 3 sons, Todd, Tyler, and Dane, and understood that he still had one reason to play. Not to replace Motörhead, but to keep its spirit alive. Phil Campbell and the Bastard Sons was born as a reminder. Rock isn't dead, as long as someone passes it on through blood. 3 generations stepped onto the stage: a father, his 3 sons, and a young vocalist, creating a sound both wild and warm. They didn't try to recreate Motörhead, nor did they chase modern trends. In 2018, their debut album, The Age of Absurdity, was released, embodying pure rock energy, thick sound, solid riffs, and drums pulsing like a reborn heartbeat. The album won the Metal Hammer Award for Best Debut Album, recognition not just for the music, but for the journey of a man brave enough to start over at 60. 2 years later, We're the Bastards, 2020, cemented their unique identity. The music was more mature, the lyrics rough-edged but sincere, speaking of legacy, belief, and endurance. In those songs, the grief of the past gave way to the defiance of the present. It was no longer the story of a former Motörhead member, but of a father leading his sons forward through the very music that had once saved him. By 2023-2024, they released Kings of the Asylum, their 3rd album, and a full declaration of independence. The sound was heavier, more modern, blending classic groove with youthful fire. The band toured across Europe, from major festivals to intimate clubs, where audiences greeted them not out of nostalgia for Motörhead, but out of respect for the name Campbell. And in 2025, their first Australian tour was announced, marking the first time Phil Campbell would step onto that continent as the leader of his own band. There was no Lemmy, no old icon left, but the fire remained. A fire passed down through blood, through family, through every night he still played with relentless conviction. In a world where so many artists live off the fading glow of their past, Phil Campbell chose to move forward, to write on, proving that true legacy isn't found in what's gone, but in keeping the music alive in the hands of those you love. For more than half a century with a guitar in his hands, Phil Campbell never tried to become a legend. Yet it was precisely his humility and endurance that made him an essential part of heavy metal history. He didn't play 6-minute solos, top charts, or embody rebellion like Lemmy Kilmister. But across 31 years with Motörhead, Phil was the one who kept the engine running, the steady musical heartbeat that never stopped. His legacy isn't measured in awards, but in how he made the music itself last longer than fame ever could. From Orgasmatron to Bad Magic, Campbell appeared on over 15 studio albums and thousands of shows, helping Motörhead survive every change, scandal, and Lemmy's many health crises. Through each era, he adapted without ever losing identity, a rare feat in a world where artists are often consumed by their own sound. If Lemmy was the fire, then Campbell was the steel that forged the furnace. His influence extends far beyond Motörhead. Generations of guitarists, from Matt Heafy, Trivium, to Zakk Wylde, Black Label Society, to Mila Petrozza, Creator, cite Phil as the model of a player who serves the music, not the ego. In them, you can hear the Campbell spirit. Technique serving emotion. The guitar as foundation rather than spectacle. The way he steps on stage, no showboating, no speeches, just plugging in and playing, has become a quiet emblem of absolute professionalism in the metal world. But perhaps Phil Campbell's greatest legacy doesn't lie in studios or on stages, but in the way he's lived. He kept his family, his fire, and his integrity intact in a world that rewards destruction. Those who worked with him often admit, without Campbell, Motörhead might have ended back in the 1980s. And without him, the spirit of that band could not have endured until Lemmy's final day. Looking back, no one will call Phil Campbell the greatest guitarist, but they will call him the most steadfast. An artist who stayed true to what he believed in, from dingy Cardiff pubs to the colossal stage of Wacken Open Air, from a working-class kid to a man passing his legacy through 3 generations. He never needed the spotlight. His quiet loyalty and refusal to compromise were enough to etch his name forever in the hearts of those who love rock. What makes Phil Campbell truly remarkable isn't what he's done, but how he exists, quietly, steadily, and without seeking validation. In a world where most artists sacrifice themselves just to be seen, he chose to stand aside, keeping time so others could shine, then retreating into silence. Yet that very silence has become his most powerful sound, deep, lasting, and real. While other legends have faded away or become icons hanging on walls, Phil is still out there, playing, touring, and tuning his guitars in his garage, as if music never left him. At an age when most have put down their instruments, he continues, not to prove anything, but simply to live in rhythm with the heartbeat that has guided him all his life. Perhaps that is the simplest definition of greatness. Not to be celebrated, but to never stop living for what you believe in. And maybe, in a world this loud, the ones we admire most are those who know how to stand still, stay silent, and never give up. If Phil Campbell's story touched you, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe, so together we can keep telling the stories of those who chose to stay true to music, even after the lights have gone out.